The courtroom was filled with tension and disbelief. At the center of it all stood a young girl, barely old enough to vote, who had just left a seasoned judge and a room full of lawyers completely stunned. This was no ordinary trial. And 18-year-old Leah Carter was no ordinary defendant. The judge, known as Judge Richardson, infamous for his harsh demeanor and biting remarks, had spent the last 20 minutes mocking Leah for representing herself in such a serious case. "Do you think this is a game?" Judge Richardson sneered, his voice laced with contempt and an almost theatrical disdain, as if savoring the power imbalance. The tension reached its peak. And then, with a calm, steady voice, Leah spoke. The room fell silent. Every eye now fixed on the young woman who dared to stand tall amidst the storm. With a calm and commanding presence, she began to tear apart the prosecution's arguments, citing legal precedents with the precision of a seasoned attorney. Gasps rippled through the audience as they realized this teenager wasn't just defending herself, she was masterfully controlling the courtroom. Leah's story is one of determination, brilliance, and the relentless pursuit of justice. A child prodigy who kept her talents hidden. Leah's path to this moment was anything but ordinary. When injustice struck close to home, she couldn't stand idly by. Despite her age and the odds stacked against her, Leah stood tall, determined to prove that justice knows no age or boundaries. This is the story of a young woman who refused to be underestimated, who used her courage and intellect to challenge a system built to doubt her. A story about standing up for what's right, even when the world is against you. Prepare to witness an incredible journey of perseverance and triumph in the face of overwhelming odds. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs, a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Spectators filled every seat, their eyes fixed on the young girl standing at the defendant's table. The walls, lined with dark wooden panels, seemed to close in under the weight of Judge Richardson's booming voice. His reputation as a ruthless and condescending figure preceded him, and today he was in rare form. "Miss Carter," he sneered, adjusting his glasses as he peered down from the bench. "Do you really expect this court to take you seriously? You're a child, playing dress-up as an attorney. This is not some high school debate club." His voice dripped with derision, and soft chuckles rippled through the audience. Leah Carter stood still, her expression composed. She wore a simple navy blazer, her hair neatly tied back, and her hands rested lightly on the table before her. Despite the judge's sharp words and the skeptical glances from the audience, she radiated an air of quiet confidence. "Your Honor," Leah began, her voice steady but firm, "I am here today to ensure that justice is served, not to entertain doubts about my age or appearance. If I may, I'd like to begin by addressing the prosecution's opening statements." The room grew silent. Judge Richardson leaned back in his chair, his smug smirk unwavering. "By all means, enlighten us," he said sarcastically. Leah took a deep breath and stepped forward. "The prosecution has claimed that my client, Teresa Morgan, violated the terms of her lease by housing additional tenants. However, the evidence they presented fails to substantiate this claim. In fact, it directly contradicts documented records." She picked up a folder and held it up for the court to see. "Exhibit A," Leah continued, flipping through the papers with practiced ease, "is a copy of my client's lease agreement. Nowhere in this document does it specify a limit on the number of occupants. Only that all tenants must be listed. My client has complied with this requirement. She paused for effect. Then placed another paper on the table. Exhibit B is a signed statement from a neighbor, corroborating that only my client and her 2 children reside in the unit. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a wave, punctuated by sharp gasps of disbelief. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, some exchanging wide-eyed glances as Leah dismantled the prosecution's case piece by piece. Judge Richardson's smirk faltered slightly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the papers passed up to him by the bailiff. The prosecution also presented a letter from the landlord, Leah said, her voice unwavering, claiming he had evidence of additional tenants. However, this letter lacks any supporting documentation. Your Honor, I move to have this piece of evidence dismissed on the grounds of inadmissibility due to its speculative nature. Judge Richardson frowned, his pen tapping against the desk as he reviewed the documents. Proceed, he muttered, a hint of unease creeping into his tone. Leah seized the moment. Furthermore, I'd like to draw the court's attention to a series of email correspondences between my client and the landlord. She handed another document to the bailiff. These emails not only show that my client consistently paid her rent on time but also include explicit acknowledgement from the landlord that no violations of the lease have occurred. The judge's expression darkened, his usual air of superiority replaced by a flicker of doubt as he scanned the emails. For a moment, it seemed as though the weight of the truth was pressing down on him. The prosecution's lead attorney, visibly flustered, stood to object. Your Honor, we believe this evidence was obtained under questionable circumstances. Leah didn't flinch. Your Honor, these emails were obtained through legal discovery procedures and have been authenticated by a certified digital forensics expert. I can provide the documentation if necessary. The judge looked up, his gaze shifting between Leah and the prosecution. The once dismissive expression on his face had been replaced with one of growing uncertainty. Miss Carter, Judge Richardson said, his voice tinged with frustration. You're remarkably well prepared. But I have to ask, who are you? Really? A high school student with this level of expertise is unprecedented. Leah stepped forward, her expression calm but resolute. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out a crisp folder and handed it to the bailiff. The room held its collective breath as the bailiff passed the document to the judge. Judge Richardson opened the folder and scanned its contents. His hands trembled slightly as he read. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Your Honor, Leah said softly but firmly, I am fully qualified to present this case. My credentials are listed in that document. Shall we continue? The judge finally looked up, his expression a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. Very well, he muttered, leaning back in his chair. You may proceed. The room erupted into hushed whispers, the air electric with shock and intrigue. Leah Carter had not only silenced a judge but captivated an entire courtroom. This was no ordinary trial. And Leah was no ordinary teenager. Maya Brooks grew up in a modest home on the south side of Chicago, where life was often challenging but filled with love and wisdom. Raised by her grandmother, Clara, after the passing of her parents when she was just 5 years old, Maya's childhood was shaped by Clara's unwavering guidance and support. Clara, a retired schoolteacher with a fierce belief in the power of education, instilled in Maya a deep respect for knowledge and a strong moral compass. From an early age, it was clear that Maya was no ordinary child. By the age of 7, while most kids her age were playing with toys, Maya was devouring books about history, science, and, most notably, law. Clara often found her sitting cross-legged on the floor of their small home library, poring over legal textbooks she'd picked up from second-hand shops. Maya's fascination with the justice system was sparked by the stories Clara shared, stories of individuals who had stood up against inequality and made a difference in their communities. She always had that spark, Clara would later recall with pride. It was like she was born with a fire inside her. A fire for fairness and doing what's right. By the time she was 12, Maya was debating college students at community events, often leaving them stunned with her razor-sharp arguments and her ability to dissect complex topics with ease. Teachers and neighbors quickly began to notice her brilliance. But Maya never let the attention go to her head. Clara's teachings kept her grounded. Talent is a gift, but character is a choice, Clara would often remind her. Despite her extraordinary intellect, Maya chose to live a quiet, low-profile life. She avoided the spotlight, uninterested in accolades or fame. Instead, she focused on using her abilities to help others, even in small ways. She would assist classmates with their studies, volunteer at the local library, and occasionally help neighbors resolve disputes by mediating conversations. Her motivation to pursue justice grew stronger after a pivotal moment in her early teens. One day, while accompanying Clara to a community meeting, Maya witnessed a landlord berate an elderly tenant who was struggling to pay rent. The landlord's harsh words and dismissive attitude left Maya seething with anger. She couldn't understand why someone with so much power would choose to demean rather than support. "That's why the world needs people like you," Clara had said later that evening. Sensing Maya's frustration. "The world needs people like you, Maya," Clara had said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of wisdom. "Not everyone has the courage or the tools to fight for themselves. If you see injustice, don't just get angry, use what you have to make it right." That advice stayed with Maya, shaping the way she approached every challenge. Over time, her determination to make a difference became a defining part of who she was. Though many doubted her abilities because of her age and background, Maya refused to let those doubts define her. She believed deeply that everyone deserved to be treated fairly, regardless of their circumstances. When Maya overheard Teresa Morgan's tearful story at the grocery store years later, something inside her clicked. It was as if all the lessons from her grandmother, all the hours spent studying and debating, had led her to that moment. As Maya overheard Teresa's tearful plea at the grocery store, all of Clara's lessons, the hours of study, and her quiet determination seemed to coalesce into one undeniable purpose: this was her moment to make a difference. Maya approached Teresa with a determination that belied her years. Despite Teresa's initial skepticism, "You're just a kid," she'd said. Maya calmly assured her, "I've been told that before. Trust me. I can help." That was the beginning of Maya's journey into the spotlight. A journey driven not by a desire for recognition but by a calling to fight injustice. Clara's wisdom, Maya's unshakable confidence, and her remarkable intellect had all converged to create a young woman who was ready to change the world, one case at a time. It was a quiet afternoon when Maya Brooks accompanied her grandmother Clara to their local grocery store. The familiar chatter of neighbors and the soft hum of fluorescent lights filled the air. As Maya waited in line at the checkout, she overheard a heated conversation by the register. A woman, her voice trembling with emotion, was explaining her dire situation to the cashier. "I don't know what to do," she said, her words barely audible through her sobs. "My landlord says we're being evicted. I've paid every cent on time. He says I violated the lease. But it's just me and my kids. I swear. I didn't do anything wrong." Maya turned to see the woman Teresa Morgan clutching a handful of receipts, her face etched with desperation. Maya listened closely as Teresa explained her plight. The landlord claimed Teresa had too many people living in her apartment and was evicting her under that pretense. But Teresa insisted it was a lie. "He just wants me out so he can raise the rent," she said, her voice cracking. After Teresa left the store, Maya couldn't shake the woman's words from her mind. That evening, she approached Clara and shared what she'd heard. "It's not right," Maya said, pacing the small kitchen. "She's being bullied because she doesn't have the resources to fight back." Clara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Then maybe it's time someone stood up for her," she said gently. The next day, Maya found Teresa's address and knocked on her door. Teresa hesitated at first, skeptical of the teenager standing on her porch. "You're just a kid," she said with a faint laugh, shaking her head. But Maya's confidence didn't waver. "I've been studying law for years," she said calmly. "I think you have a strong case. Will you let me help you?" Reluctantly, Teresa invited her in and handed over a folder of documents: her lease agreement, payment receipts, and correspondence with the landlord. Over the next several days, Maya pored over every detail. It didn't take long for her to notice glaring inconsistencies in the landlord's claims. The lease agreement made no mention of a limit on occupants, and the payment records showed Teresa had never missed a rent payment. Maya drafted a formal letter to the landlord, citing the inconsistencies and warning him to cease the eviction or face legal action. Clara helped Maya refine the letter, ensuring it was both professional and persuasive. When the landlord dismissed the letter as a bluff, Maya took the next step, helping Teresa file a case in small claims court. Word spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. The quiet, bookish teenager everyone had seen with her nose in legal texts was suddenly taking on a high-stakes eviction case. Reactions were mixed. Some were supportive, admiring Maya's courage and intellect. Others were skeptical, unable to believe that someone so young could succeed where experienced adults had struggled. As the court date approached, the buzz grew louder. Local reporters caught wind of the story, intrigued by the idea of a teenager standing up to an unjust landlord. On the morning of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Neighbors, reporters, and even a few local attorneys had come to witness the case. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse as Teresa nervously clutched her documents. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Maya, dressed in a modest blazer and carrying her carefully organized case files, looked calm and collected. Teresa, on the other hand, was visibly nervous. "What if we lose?" she whispered to Maya as they took their seats. Maya placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We won't," she said firmly. The landlord's attorney, a middle-aged man named Mr. Cole, opened with a confident argument, painting Teresa as a tenant who had violated the terms of her lease and caused disruptions in the building. But as soon as Maya stood to present her case, the tone of the room shifted. "Your Honor," Maya began, her voice steady, "the allegations against my client are not only baseless but contradicted by the very documents provided by the landlord." She presented a copy of the lease agreement and payment receipts, pointing out the inconsistencies in the landlord's claims. She then introduced signed statements from neighbors, verifying that only Teresa and her 2 children lived in the apartment. The judge listened intently, his expression growing more serious as Maya laid out her arguments. The landlord, seated across the room, shifted uncomfortably. The courtroom murmured as Maya introduced an email exchange in which the landlord admitted his intention to evict Teresa in order to raise the rent for new tenants. Gasps rippled through the audience when the judge read the emails aloud. By the end of the hearing, it was clear that the landlord's case was falling apart. Reporters outside the courthouse rushed to get statements. But Maya shielded Teresa from the cameras, guiding her to safety. That evening, Teresa hugged Maya tightly. "You're incredible," she said, tears streaming down her face. Maya smiled faintly. "This is just the beginning," she replied. Little did she know how true those words would prove to be. As Maya Brooks prepared for the second court hearing, she knew the stakes were higher than ever. The landlord, emboldened by his attorney, Mr. Cole, had doubled down on his accusations. The eviction case had taken a dark turn, with new allegations surfacing and tensions in the courtroom reaching a boiling point. The landlord now claimed that Teresa Morgan was hiding additional income and housing unregistered tenants. Accusations that Maya knew were baseless. Mr. Cole presented what he described as concrete evidence, forged financial records and falsified witness statements. The courtroom atmosphere grew tense as he dramatically laid out his case. "This document," Mr. Cole said, holding up a thick folder, "proves that the plaintiff has been less than forthcoming about her financial situation. It clearly indicates undeclared income from multiple sources." Maya rose calmly, her expression steady. "Your Honor, I would like to request the opportunity to review these documents," she said. Judge Patterson, who had initially been skeptical of Maya's capabilities, nodded begrudgingly. "You'll have your chance, Miss Brooks," he said, though a trace of irritation lingered in his tone. Over the next several days, Maya worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. The financial records presented by the landlord raised several red flags. With the help of Aaron, a digital forensics expert she'd reached out to through Clara's connections, Maya began piecing together the landlord's scheme. "It's a shell company," Aaron explained one evening as he analyzed the records. "Harmony Solutions isn't a real business. It's a front. Payments were routed through this company to create the illusion of undeclared income." Maya leaned over Aaron's laptop, her brow furrowed. "Can we prove it?" she asked. Aaron nodded. "Absolutely. The paper trail is sloppy. It's clear that the company exists solely on paper, with no real operations. I can provide a detailed report for the court." With Aaron's findings, Maya returned to court, ready to dismantle the landlord's claims. During the hearing, she presented the evidence with precision. "Your Honor," Maya began, "the financial records submitted by the defense are not only inaccurate but intentionally fabricated to mislead this court. Harmony Solutions, the entity listed as the source of income, is a shell company with no legitimate business operations." Here is a forensic report detailing the inconsistencies and fraudulent activity associated with the company. The courtroom erupted in whispers as the judge carefully examined the report. Maya's voice remained steady as she continued. This is a deliberate attempt by the landlord to discredit my client and evade accountability. Judge Patterson, who had previously viewed Maya with thinly veiled disdain, began to regard her with a new sense of respect. This is serious. Mr. Cole, he said, turning to the landlord's attorney. Do you have a response to these allegations? Mr. Cole hesitated, his confidence visibly shaken. Your Honor, we believe the validity of these claims needs further verification, he stammered. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression stern. You'd better hope so. Miss Brooks, you've made a compelling case. I'll allow the evidence. Outside the courtroom, however, the battle was far from over. As Maya and Teresa left the courthouse that day, they were confronted by a police officer. Miss Brooks, the officer said, we need you to come down to the station for questioning. There's been an accusation of tampering with evidence. Teresa gasped, her face pale. Maya. What do we do? She whispered. Maya remained calm, her expression unwavering. I'll cooperate, she said to the officer. But first, I'd like to speak with my client and legal counsel. The officer hesitated but eventually agreed. Maya turned to Teresa and spoke in a low voice. This is a scare tactic. They're trying to rattle us because their case is falling apart. Stay strong. At the station, Maya calmly provided her statement, along with documentation proving the authenticity of her evidence. She presented the chain of custody for the forensic report and emails, leaving no room for doubt. After hours of questioning, the officers released her. As she left the station, she was met by Aaron, who had rushed to her side. They really tried to pull a fast one. Didn't they? He said, shaking his head. They're desperate, Maya replied, her tone firm. And desperation makes people dangerous. We need to be ready for whatever they throw at us next. The intimidation tactics didn't end there. Later that evening, Maya received an anonymous phone call. The voice on the other end was calm but menacing. You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Brooks. Sometimes it's better to know your place. Maya squared her shoulders, refusing to show fear. Justice doesn't have a place, she replied firmly before hanging up. The next day, Maya walked back into the courtroom, her resolve stronger than ever. Judge Patterson acknowledged her with a nod, his previous skepticism replaced by genuine respect. The landlord's team, on the other hand, looked visibly shaken. As the hearing resumed, Maya presented her findings with even greater precision, systematically dismantling each false claim made by the landlord. By the end of the session, it was clear to everyone in the room that Maya wasn't just a brilliant legal mind, she was fearless in her pursuit of justice. Judge Patterson addressed the court, his tone measured but firm. This case has revealed a disturbing pattern of deceit and misconduct. Miss Brooks, your dedication and thoroughness are commendable. The court will continue to hear this case with the utmost seriousness. As Maya left the courtroom that day, reporters swarmed her, shouting questions and snapping photos. But she paid them no mind. Her focus remained on Teresa and the fight for justice. Maya knew the battle wasn't over. The landlord and his team would continue to push back. But she was ready. Each challenge only strengthened her resolve. And the growing support from the community fueled her determination. For Maya, this was more than a legal fight, it was a fight for what was right. And she wasn't about to back down. The air in the courtroom was heavy with tension as the final day of the trial began. The landlord, emboldened by his legal team, had filed a countersuit for defamation against Teresa Morgan, claiming that her accusations had damaged his reputation and business. It was a desperate move, but one that added another layer of complexity to the case. Judge Patterson leaned forward on the bench, his sharp eyes fixed on Mr. Cole, the landlord's attorney. "Mr. Cole," the judge began, his tone skeptical, "you've brought forth this countersuit for defamation. Yet your client is already facing allegations of misconduct and fraud. This court will require compelling evidence to proceed with such a claim." Mr. Cole stood confidently, attempting to defend his client's actions. "Your Honor, my client's reputation has been unjustly tarnished by baseless accusations. We have witnesses and evidence to prove that these claims are unfounded and defamatory." Maya Brooks rose to her feet, her calm and determined demeanor commanding the room. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "we're ready to address the allegations in the countersuit and to present further evidence that will expose a pattern of deceit by the defendant." The judge nodded, motioning for Maya to proceed. Maya began her cross-examination of the landlord's witnesses, dissecting their testimonies with surgical precision. One by one, their stories unraveled under Maya's relentless questioning. "Mr. Jensen," Maya asked one of the witnesses, "you testified that Teresa Morgan was housing additional tenants in her apartment. Can you provide specific dates or evidence to support this claim?" The witness hesitated, his confidence faltering. "Well, I heard from someone else in the building." Maya raised an eyebrow. "So, to clarify, your statement is based on hearsay rather than direct observation?" The witness shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, I suppose so." "Thank you," Maya said, turning back to the judge. "No further questions." Next, Maya called a surprise witness, a former tenant of the landlord who had come forward after hearing about the case in the news. The man, visibly nervous but resolute, testified about similar experiences of harassment and unjust eviction tactics. "He tried to push me out, too," the witness said. "Claimed I violated my lease. But when I asked for proof, he couldn't provide any. He just wanted to raise the rent." Maya turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this testimony highlights a clear pattern of behavior by the defendant, consistent with the experiences of my client." The courtroom murmured as the weight of the evidence began to tip in Teresa's favor. Mr. Cole's arguments grew increasingly frantic, but his confidence was visibly shaken. Finally, it was time for closing arguments. Maya stood, her presence commanding yet calm. She addressed the courtroom with conviction. "Your Honor, this case is not just about one family fighting to keep their home. It is about justice. It is about standing up to those who use their power to exploit the vulnerable. The evidence we've presented shows a deliberate and systematic attempt to deceive this court and to silence my client. Teresa Morgan is not asking for anything unreasonable. She is asking for fairness. For her rights as a tenant to be respected. and for the truth to prevail. Today, we have shown that truth, piece by piece. And now, we ask this court to uphold it. Maya's voice carried through the silent courtroom, her words resonating with everyone present. As she finished, she glanced at Teresa, who sat clutching her hands tightly, tears streaming down her face. Judge Patterson leaned forward, his face stern but thoughtful. He addressed the courtroom, his voice firm. This court has carefully weighed the evidence and testimonies presented. Judge Patterson began, his voice steady but deliberate. The room held its collective breath as he paused, glancing down at his notes. Finally, he looked up, his expression resolute. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Teresa Morgan. The eviction is ruled invalid, and the defendant is ordered to cease all harassment and compensate the plaintiff for damages incurred. The judge paused, his gaze shifting to the landlord and his attorney. Furthermore, this court will refer the defendant for investigation into potential fraud, evidence tampering, and other misconduct. This behavior will not be tolerated in my courtroom or anywhere else. The room erupted into applause, reporters scrambling to capture the moment. Teresa hugged Maya tightly, sobbing with relief and gratitude. "We did it," Teresa whispered, her voice breaking with emotion as tears streamed down her face. Maya pulled her into a tight embrace, her own eyes glistening with tears of relief and pride. "We did it together," Maya replied, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. Maya smiled, tears glistening in her eyes as the weight of the victory settled over her. As the landlord and his legal team hurriedly exited the courtroom, the crowd swarmed Maya and Teresa, shouting questions and offering congratulations. Maya shielded Teresa as best she could, guiding her out of the courthouse. Later that evening, Maya sat with Clara at their small kitchen table, exhaustion mingling with pride. Clara placed a warm hand on Maya's shoulder. "I always knew you'd make a difference," she said softly. Maya nodded, a faint smile on her lips. The fight had been long and grueling, but it had been worth it. Justice had prevailed, and Maya knew this was just the beginning of her journey. There were more battles to fight, more voices to amplify, and more people to help. For Maya, this victory wasn't the end. It was a promise to continue standing up for what was right, no matter how tough the fight. The courtroom victory was only the beginning of the ripple effects caused by Maya Brooks' unwavering fight for justice. Within hours of the verdict, the story dominated local and national headlines. Articles titled "Teenage Prodigy Takes Down Corrupt Landlord" and "Justice Served by a Fearless Young Attorney" spread like wildfire across news outlets and social media. Reporters clamored for interviews, and Maya's name became synonymous with resilience and courage. The consequences for the landlord were swift and severe. Investigations revealed a pattern of fraud, illegal evictions, and evidence tampering across multiple properties. Authorities seized several of his buildings, and former tenants, inspired by Maya's victory, began to come forward with their own stories of harassment and injustice. The landlord faced additional charges, including tax evasion and racketeering, and his once thriving real estate empire crumbled under the weight of his misdeeds. For Maya, the victory wasn't just about one case, it was a call to action. With the support of her grandmother Clara and newfound allies in the community, Maya founded the Justice Collective, a grassroots organization dedicated to protecting tenants' rights and holding unethical landlords accountable. Operating out of a modest office in a local community center, the collective quickly gained traction, assisting dozens of families in avoiding evictions and exposing housing injustices. One case involved an elderly couple who were being forced out of their home of 30 years. Another focused on a single father fighting an illegal rent hike. Each success story further cemented Maya's growing influence and inspired others to join her cause. Her work became a beacon of hope for vulnerable tenants, proving that even against powerful adversaries, justice could prevail. But not everyone celebrated Maya's rise. Behind the scenes, whispers of opposition began to grow. Lucas Harper, a private investigator with a reputation for intimidation and dirty tactics, had been hired by a shadowy network of landlords determined to silence Maya and protect their interests. Harper's veiled threats reminded Maya that the fight was far from over. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the office, Maya received a call from an unknown number. A familiar, menacing voice spoke. "You've made some powerful enemies, Miss Brooks. Don't think for a second they'll let you win again." Maya's jaw tightened, but her resolve only grew stronger. "I don't care how powerful they are," she replied firmly. "I'm not backing down." As the challenges mounted, so did Maya's determination. For every obstacle she faced, she saw an opportunity to prove that justice was worth fighting for. Her journey was just beginning. And she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't fighting alone. The people she had helped, the allies she had gained, and the truth she stood for were all on her side. And that, she realized, was more powerful than any threat. Maya Brooks' story is a powerful reminder that courage and intelligence can overcome even the greatest obstacles. Despite her age, the prejudice she faced, and the enormous power of her opponents, Maya proved that standing up for what's right can bring about real change. Her determination to fight for justice not only saved Teresa Morgan and her family from eviction but also exposed systemic corruption and inspired an entire community to take action. This story isn't just about Maya, it's about the difference one person can make when they refuse to give up. Maya's relentless pursuit of truth shows us that no matter how small we might feel in the face of injustice, our actions can ripple outward, creating a wave of change. But this isn't just a story to be admired, it's a call to action. Injustice exists in many forms, and it thrives when people stay silent. Let Maya's journey remind you that courage starts with a single step. In your neighborhood, workplace, or community, look for ways to stand up for what's right. Every small action contributes to a larger wave of change. If you see someone in need, offer a helping hand. If you witness wrongdoing, challenge it. Change begins with each of us. And together, we can create a fairer, more compassionate world. Supporting those who fight for justice is equally important. Whether it's donating to grassroots organizations, volunteering your time, or simply amplifying their message, your contribution matters. As Maya's story shows, when people come together to stand against injustice, even the most daunting battles can be won. So, as you leave today, ask yourself, how can I make a difference? What injustices around me need to be addressed? Remember, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to act despite it. The fight for justice is ongoing, and it needs all of us to take part. Will you answer the call?